All right. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you may be in the world, potentially watching this Surfline live stream of Nazaré, Portugal. I am Director of Forecasting, Kevin Wallace. I am joined by my fellow lead forecaster, Kurt Corte, and we are on the front edge of a very significant swell that's building into Portugal and the rest of Europe this afternoon. We're about 4:15 local time at Nazaré, and starting to see some extra large sets pour in. This swell should be building quickly through the remainder of the afternoon. At this point, we expect it to peak overnight and still provide very solid surf on Thursday morning. Thursday morning probably going to be the day as this swell peaks, and we're looking for basically buttery conditions out there. We've been tracking this swell over the last few days. Kurt, you've had a pretty intimate relationship with this swell, and the storm that created all of this started with Hurricane Epsilon, which has been a hurricane of the Atlantic, or was a hurricane of the Atlantic for several days. If you want to run us through what Epsilon did and why we're getting such a large surf for Europe as well.
Sure. Thanks, Kevin. This is definitely a pretty historic event, and really cool to see how all this kind of is connected. We have the Hurricane Epsilon that was over the central Atlantic last week and sent really some pumping surf down to the Caribbean. I saw some great footage from Barbados, some great photos from various spots in Puerto Rico and elsewhere in the Caribbean. Sent some good waves to me here on the Outer Banks, and then also up into the northeastern U.S. and even up into Canada as well. A lot of times when we see these systems, especially in October, when you get the hurricanes that recurve, similar actually to what happens over in the Western Pacific as well with the typhoons there. But a system like Epsilon goes up into the North Atlantic, eventually loses its tropical characteristics. But as a surfer, that's really not that big of a deal. Actually, a lot of times these recurving systems undergo something that we call extratropical transition. And when that occurs, you can see a really expansion of the strongest winds. And when you tie it in with a non-tropical system like what we saw here coming off of Greenland, you can really, as you said, throw gasoline on the fire, and these things can just really quickly intensify. And as we were looking at some of the observations over the past 24 to 36 hours, it's a massive area of 50 knot winds over the Atlantic, peak winds 70 to 80 knots in there. We saw satellite observations of over 50 feet. I think the one we saw was 56 feet. Just a really impressive storm all the way around.
Yeah, looking at as you mentioned, some of the observations. I think the ones that really stood out to me was the length of the fetch of that 40 to 50 knot winds, and then the peak seas that we got from one of the satellites. I think it was 56, 57 feet. And it's worth saying too that we never actually got a great pass through the heart of the storm. I wouldn't have been surprised at all to see seas in excess of 60 feet in this thing, just given the wind speeds that we saw and some of the other observations on the kind of the margins of the storm, if you will. And like as you mentioned too, that Sean, our founder, the founder of Surfline, Sean Collins, used to call this type of setup like throwing gasoline on a fire, just explosive. And you see some of the strongest storms worldwide of the year when this occurs. Think back to like the perfect storm of 1991 that delivered all that crazy surf to the East Coast, and an infamous Hollywood movie starring George Clooney. And there's been a couple other instances over the years. This is certainly one of the more impressive storms that I've seen over the last several years. I think going back to probably Hercules was really the only one that I could definitively say was more impressive than this storm. But what we're seeing from it too is fantastic swell direction for Nazaré, fantastic swell period. It's going to be very long swell period. We are starting to see some of the offshore spiking with energy, and swell period getting up into the 20 to 22 second range, which is relatively rare to see periods of that magnitude with the size that we're expecting to see too. I think tomorrow, as we move through late this afternoon, this evening, and tonight, when we do expect the swell to peak, we're looking at deep water swell height off of Nazaré somewhere in the 18 to 20 foot plus range, with very long swell periods of 19 to 20 seconds. So largest waves are likely going to happen overnight, but first thing tomorrow morning too, and potentially the very end of today. Hopefully, we'll start to see some really big sets filling in as we move towards sundown here over the next kind of hour and a half or so. Looking at surf probably in the 50 to 70 range conservatively, I think, which is pretty impressive. I think there is at least a chance that we could see maybe a new world record out of this swell for largest wave ever ridden. We'll see, but swell direction, swell period, and especially conditions are all lining up this evening and going into tomorrow. I mean, it looks like absolutely butter conditions for this swell tomorrow, looking at light east-southeasterly winds in the morning, and then just trending light on shore for the afternoon. So it should just be an incredible day of surf for tomorrow. And hopefully we'll see a few come in this afternoon too. Kurt, we were mentioning a little bit earlier that the cam looks a little bit dark. Part of that is obviously we're moving towards sundown right now. Sun's going to go down in about an hour and a half. Looks like we got some clouds, but also probably a lot of mist in the air, kind of lighter winds, and with this big swell coming in, the visibility is a little bit lower than we'd ideally like to see, but hopefully see a few big peaks roll in here over the next hour or so.
Yeah, I was wondering how you were going to mix in reference to your favorite movie there, but I think George Clooney, a young George Clooney, could probably play a Kevin Wallace in this. If we were going to make a movie.
There we go.
Wonderful satellite imagery here. That's pretty much textbook what you see. Those little speckles of clouds. When you get that on a satellite imagery, you got some pretty strong winds happening down there. So actually, right off the coast of Ireland, we've seen some pretty impressive buoy observations today, overnight, last night into today. Saw significant swell heights approaching 50 feet, and actually a single wave measurement of 30 meters, which is actually close to 100 feet. So we'll have to see how that actually becomes verified, but definitely some eye-popping numbers coming out of the North Atlantic right now. Closer down to Portugal, we're seeing the wave heights starting to peak on, or not peak, but actually increase and spike here on some of the upstream buoys from Nazaré. So we expect the swell should fill in pretty quickly here over the next couple of hours, heading towards that peak, like you said, overnight into early tomorrow morning. It's all around, it's just a very impressive storm. It's fairly uncommon for a system like this. In October, looking at some of the historical stats, this is going to be a top 3 event for Portugal, it looks like, maybe even nudging into the top 2 there. So it's not every day we see something like this. And as you mentioned, the conditions along with it are just going to be outstanding. And that's one of the main variables, so we look back into the historic numbers. You can get bigger numbers, but a lot of times those come with pretty bad conditions, especially later in the year when our storm track tends to kind of be a little more southerly down and impacting the Portuguese coastline there. So, this is a pretty rare bird. And speaking of rare birds, here's Mundaka, which obviously we're going to wait for the tide drop here a little bit, and that is actually going to be probably one of the crazy spots to watch if you're going to be up, super late or early tomorrow, depending on where you are. Pull up the Mundaka cam, because when it's low tide tomorrow morning and incoming, and that swell's peaking and the winds are light offshore, it's going to be bombing there tomorrow, and probably a little more human for most people as well.
Yeah, we were watching this cam just yesterday. We had another large swell impact most of Europe on Monday and into Tuesday. And yesterday afternoon, as the tide dropped, it was pumping already, and it's a fickle spot. Obviously, it's super tide dependent and wind dependent too, like most spots around the world, wind dependent. But as this tide drops late today, should start to improve. And as you mentioned, I think the magic window is probably going to be around mid morning tomorrow with the lower tide, lower incoming tide too, which is important, and favorable winds. And the cool thing too is it looks like there's going to be favorable winds at some point in the swell for almost everywhere across Europe. We're looking at super tubes here, just a little bit south of Nazaré, and this isn't the perfect swell direction for supers, but it's going to get in. We can obviously see some surf on there right now, and winds should improve kind of through this evening, and probably going to be pretty large and unruly there, but maybe some windows as we move into tomorrow morning, and really from fickle reef slabs up in Ireland, down through Mendaka, and some of the big wave spots in the Basque Country, obviously Nazaré, super tubes, getting down into your points down through North Africa. We are looking at favorable conditions just about everywhere. For Portugal, Nazaré in particular, we're going to see a little weak area, high pressure, re-strengthen over the region or strengthen over the region, and just going to set up light winds throughout the day. Should be a pleasant day of weather as well. Mild sunshine, and should just make for great viewing tomorrow, with some what should be really, really large surf.
You mentioned Northwest Africa, and it's another spot that has a good tidal situation during the peak of the swell with the lows early and late in the day. It's going to be some bombing surf there. We have that anchor point cam that should be pretty fun to watch, especially tomorrow afternoon local time and into Friday as well. See any other observations or anything that we've seen that really strikes you here, Kevin? Is there?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of them. I was looking at some of the buoys in the Azores last night, kind of late last night, West Coast time, U.S. West Coast time, to
it helps put me to sleep too sometimes, to take a look at
the buoys. I used to do. I actually used to fall asleep to a weather radio. I would turn it on and just listen to buoy observations. I swear to God, I used to do that. Totally. I used to. Okay, so here I'll nerd out a little bit more. So I would fall asleep to the weather radio, and then I would dream. Like a lot of my dreams would have isobars all over them too. For those that don't know, the isobars are lines connecting equal pressure, like on a sea surface pressure map. So yes, big time nerd for sure. But was looking at some of the Azores buoy observations last night, and at this swell direction and swell period, it's probably about a kind of a 3/4 day indicator for Nazaré area. And things really started to come on kind of through the afternoon and especially the evening last night. So it was a good indication that the swell's on the way. We were looking at kind of significant wave heights in the 15 to 20 foot range, with max up over 25 feet, and that's a very long swell periods. And it's worth saying too, this swell wasn't ideally aimed at the Azores, definitely a little bit better aimed at Europe in general. So just all things are pointing to this swell being very significant, which was that's what we like to see. I don't think it wasn't really us going out on the limb calling for this to be a really large swell, but at the same time, you do like to see all of those kind of validation points upstream line up and just increase your confidence that that everything's on the way. It can be a sinking feeling in your stomach if you're calling for a big swell and all of a sudden you're starting to see satellite passes through the storm and it's not living up to forecast, and upstream buoys are just coming in under, and you start to have to degrade the swell. You never like to do that. So seeing everything come in as it has so far is it's been pretty cool, and especially that observation off of Ireland of max set up to, or max wave height up to around 100 feet. If it verifies, I believe that would be a world record. So we'll see if that verifies or not, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I think you hit on a really good point with the buoys and the satellite observations. Like, we kind of just anything that we can get our hands on, because the ocean is so vast that, you mentioned earlier about the possibility of there being 60-foot seas in the storm. And yeah, we probably think that's true, but without the ground truth of some sort of station, it's still kind of up in the air. But, the resulting swell is showing exactly how strong the storm was and everything. And I think having those observations is obviously so crucial for what we do, but it's also really important for different municipalities and emergency officials and all that sort of thing to actually be able to warn the public to, hey, don't stand on that cliff. There's there's possibly going to be a significant swell that will that could endanger the safety of the public. And obviously the guys and gals that are out on the skis and patrolling here in Nazaré, they have it dialed, and obviously they're beyond professional with their preparation and making sure that each and every person comes away from this safe, as it is a pretty historic event. We do have a couple questions that are coming from YouTube. I see Nick on Foam asks, Swells, are swells better when it hits a spot dead on, or is it better perpendicular to the beach? I think as far as size is concerned, obviously you want the strongest winds and the storm moving towards you to send the biggest surf possible to your break, if that's what you're after. But then as far as wave shape and quality, a lot of times that will depend on the nearshore bathymetry and how that swell is actually interacting with the bottom contours around your break. Obviously, like a spot like here on the Outer Banks, if we get a straight east swell, a lot of times you need to find a piece of sand that's taking that swell and kind of bending it, refracting it a little bit and making it a little more peaky. But if we get a south swell, they can sweep down the beach and be pretty good. So it kind of depends on your spot and your location, but for size, your storm, you want the system heading towards you, the strongest winds blowing in your direction, and all those sorts of things. You have anything on that, Kevin?
No, I think you pretty much nailed it, and I will shift away from that real quick and just welcome another guest. We have big wave event champ and Molokai to Oahu big time paddle champ Jamie Mitchell joining us now. He's had a lot of experience at Nazaré, and we welcome him to our broadcast here. Jamie, how's it going, mate?
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yeah, gotcha. Thanks for joining us early Hawaii time.
Yeah, well, as you can probably imagine, I wasn't getting much sleep. I got the full FOMO going on, so.
So I know we were chatting a bit this last weekend about the swell and the different options and possibilities. I know you were pretty frothy to try and get on it. Ultimately, just weren't able to do it. What was was it tough to get away from the family, tough to travel right now, or what was the final answer?
Yeah, the honest answer was money, unfortunately, because our septic tank system just took a dump, so we're down the hole for a ton of money, and that's about to happen right now. And so yeah, look, a lot of things. So yeah, look, it's just one of those ones where I told my wife, I said, if I have to force it, it's not going to feel right. But if everything comes together and it's meant to be, it's meant to be. And obviously this one wasn't. So, but I'm, as a massive fan, obviously of big wave surfing, and not just big wave surfing, but just a fan of the ocean and Mother Nature. I'm fascinated to how this is all going to play out.
Yeah, what have you been talking to any of the boys that are there, and what are they, what's their excitement level and froth level, and what are they expecting to see over the next 24 hours or so?
Yeah, I've been in close contact with Garrett and Andrew Cotton. I was going to team up with those guys if I went over. So it's interesting, right? Because I think what people may not understand is that when it gets to this next level size, which we're going to see, is that one mistake and not only could your life be over, but your day, that whole trip could be over, because I'm guessing that a trip into the shore break on the jet ski on the peak of the swell, you're probably not going to be able to manage your way back out. So it's going to be interesting to see what people's plans are, where they're going to surf. Because if Big Mama breaks, which is another section of the wave, which is further out and behind the cliff. And you've seen some of the waves like Ross Clark and where they've gone right, and that right takes you more in towards the fishing channel where the nets are. Yeah. So, if Garrett and Cotty and when I was thinking about going there, we were talking about a plan, and my plan with them was to just go right. Sit out there and wait for Big Mama, which is the biggest wave, and then make sure you go right. You're so far further out that you're sort of away from the cliff, and not even look at the lefts. That, and I think that's Garrett and Cotty's plan. So. I wonder how many other people are going to think like that, or they're just going to go for it. And I mean, look, guys like Sebastian and Maya and Lucas Chumbo, goofy footers that love that left, wave selection is going to be absolute key, because anyone that's driven a jet ski inside the zone there, it's way scarier than surfing. There, being on the jet ski is the scariest thing you can do in surfing at Nazaré. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking, like, how do you even navigate all of that, that trick and the inside stuff? Like, are you just, if you get caught inside, you just punching it back up the beach? Are you trying to find a hole, like trying to find a channel to get back out?
It's unbelievable. Kevin, it's you. So if you're lucky enough to pick your guy up, you're basically shooting all the way to the shore break. And this is another thing to think about, is that, like you said, we're early season swell, right? So has the sand all been taken away from the shore break like it usually is when these big swells come? Because that depends on what the shore break looks like in close. Like, is it dumping right on it? Do you have a little bit of stretched out sand to get in there and turn and come back around? How tight is the turning circle? And then, you are punching anywhere up to 20 feet of whitewater. And, usually if you're in a spot, you see what's coming. It's just in front of you. But at Nazaré, you can punch over a 20-foot whitewater. And then to the left of you, you might have a 10-foot wave coming sideways. And then you have to hard left turn, hit that. Then as you're hitting that, there's another one coming straight on. Then there might be another one coming from the right. And then all of a sudden you've got nowhere to go. And there's absolutely nothing you can do. I don't care who you are. Like, you're stuck and you're going to lose the ski. It's just, it's one of those things, and you've just got to try and zigzag your way out like a Rubik's Cube and hope to God that the ocean gives you a break in the sets and you can get out. But it's going to be fascinating to see how it all plays out.
One of the really interesting things that I was able to do, I was at Jaws for the Big Wave event last year, and I've been there a couple times. Where the first year I was out in the boat, and then this last year I was up on the cliff, and I was sitting basically right next to Gary Linden, and just listening to all the safety going on, and all the spotters, and kind of the different zones and everything that was going on with where which jet skis were responsible for what zone and everything like that. Is there something similar going on this? Obviously this isn't a tour event going on right now, but is there a spotter that's up on the cliff and helping ski drivers and helping with safety on a swell like this?
Yeah, so that's why Nazaré is unique another way, right? Because not only do you most, like you said at Jaws, right? If Jaws is a tow swell, you will go there with usually just you and a tow partner, and that's your tow partner is your lifeline. So you're just teams of two. Obviously, some people are able to have more, maybe more people on skis, but generally speaking, you have your ski driver and the tow guy, and you guys looking after each other. Where at Nazaré, what they realized in the early parts is that they can have a spotter. So not only to spot waves coming and pick waves that are going to be good to choose, but also when the surf falls, where are they? Which way did he fall? How far did he be washed in? Is he going to go towards the rocks? And then on top of that, the really good teams and crew that have it dialed in will have another ski, right? So what will happen is the guy towing the surfer will come in and whip the guy in, and then there's a safety guy on the channel, and that guy on the channel, or guy or girl, sorry, will follow hopefully their wave in, and then as soon as that human kicks off, that guy, they'll be there to scoop a surfer up before they get pounded. So it's very complicated, and it's not as easy as it looks. I remember Garrett saying that his wife Nicole used to spot for them, and she's probably going to be up there spotting for them today. And he went and tried to do it last year, Garrett said, for the contest with Cotty, and he said it was the most stressful job ever. He hated it, and he was picking bad waves for the guys. So it's a specific job. It's like being in the water at a spot when you start to see a wave and how it looks, what sort of taper it has on it, where it's hitting on the reef, and you get a pretty good read on what waves you want to choose. And being 200 feet up on the cliff looking at a wave is completely different. So you need someone that knows what they're looking at, and to basically they're trying to say, hey, Big Mama, number 3. There's a set coming at Big Mama, and you take number 3. So, and then you're trying to hear that in on your walkie-talkie as it's mayhem out there, and you've got add this to the mix right now. You've got an extra ski in the water too for every team that's out there. So then you start to, if you've got 15 teams in the water, there's 20 something skis. So it can get a bit hectic.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it just seems like the playing field here is bigger than probably any other big wave. That's my impression. But what do you think? How does just the area that you're trying to cover compare to a spot like Jaws or something like that?
Yeah, you're on a whole nother playing field. For example, take away Big Mama, because it doesn't break that often. So you basically what they call peak 1, peak 2, peak 3. So peak 1 is that classic big peak left that you see Sebastian and those guys coming from behind, sort of backdooring and and kicking out, and that's sort of the most dangerous spot because you're closer to the cliff if you fall. Peak 2 is that peak that if you remember, some of the waves that they were going right at that Kaleni got last year in the contest. So that's peak 2, right? So peak 2, you can also go left, but there's a nice right that will come back into peak 1's left. So, actually, that's one of my favorite peaks to paddle because it's right, and I'm a regular foot, so that feels nice. But it has a nice look to it. It's like a nice A-frame, and then you have even another peak further down the beach, peak 3, and generally speaking, each peak drops in a little bit in size and intensity as you go down. So, and then obviously on days like this afternoon or tomorrow morning, if it's that size, then you'll see those more giant, big rights and lefts that everyone calls Big Mama, which breaks another 100 or so yards out, and they're giant, those giant big ones that you see them going down. You're like, how big is this wave? It looks like it's 1,000 feet. And then it breaks and sort of mushes down the face. And, what people call mush burgers, but they don't realize that when that thing was top to bottom, it was top to bottom and already 60, 70 feet.
Yeah. I was watching a snippet of your podcast, the Late Drop podcast with Ross Clark Jones the other day, and you're going through when he got, and I think he was like over at either peak 2 or peak 3, like way down the beach, and he got pushed over into the rocks, and there was, a lot of footage of that in kind of mainstream news channels and things like that. And just the story that he talked about going through that, like I just could not imagine being in that situation. It looked like that video made it look like the scariest thing ever in the ocean to me. It was wild.
Yeah. So that was weird, like interesting, right? Like, and that's what's the beauty about these podcasts is that I'm even like I feel I'm pretty versed in the stories and the folklore of all these stories and of big wave surfing. But what I'm finding is that I'm even like learning new parts of stories or stories that we haven't heard from these guys that they're opening up, and it's so cool. And even that wave with Ross was, I just initially thought, oh wow, it must have been a big wave, peak 1 or 2 that he fell, but come to see it, he was just on a medium, even like a medium to small style wave, nearly on peak 3. And the swell is what happens when the swell at Nazaré, as you obviously know, if it's too west, it sort of misses the size and it doesn't hit the canyon right, and refracting, we don't get those A-frames. And if it's too north, it's nearly like a giant point break up the beach. And it's this sort of these right-handers, and that's sort of where it looked like to me that he was surfing. He was surfing up the beach on this sort of right. He mistimed his bottom turn. He just jumped off his board, and my guess is that with that swell being more north, the current rushes towards the cliff a lot faster. And like he said he fell off nowhere near the cliff, and then when he popped up, he was basically on the rocks within seconds. So yeah, and then you see that footage of him bounce around with the inflation vest. It's like that was actually, funnily enough, I looked at the clip that Surfline put together of that that event, and I was watching it again, and I was just like, my God, that look like to be going through your mind, and lucky, like he's lucky that it was that, like, to be in that spot on a swell like this. Pray to God that doesn't happen to anyone this swell, because you do not. That is worst case scenario.
Yeah, I can't imagine. So what, when when do you usually make the decision to go, like, and I suppose maybe there are a lot of people that are in the same realm that goes into the decision, but when do you kind of say, hey, I don't think I'm going to paddle this swell anymore, and I'm going to move to, maybe towing in or helping guys tow in? Is it either a mixture of size and I would think probably swell period too? As things get, those really long period swells, kind of like at Jaws, they just get to a point where even if it's not like the tallest swell ever, it's just there's so much energy and it's moving so fast that it's just incredibly difficult to paddle. Is there kind of a realm where you're just like, yeah, this is tough for me, or this is paddle, something like that?
Yeah, for sure. I think you've seen it in the 2 good contests that we had the first year. Second year we had a weird split day, and then the third year, the first and third year, I think you saw sort of the limit. I shouldn't say limit. We don't want to limit ourselves, but the limit of where it's probably like really safe, and and those days had wind on it. I'm really interested to see what it looks like on the downside of this swell for paddling for these guys, and with the conditions. But yeah, like you said, Kevin, to me, when I look at the paddle swell for Nazaré, it's that 16 to 17 second interval, and 8 to 10 feet of that deep water swell seems to be right around that 20-foot range with some bigger sets. And and I think that's what you look at, and in all honesty, you can't really surf Nazaré without a jet ski paddling at that size, because even if you make the best wave of your life, you kick out, there could be a 20-footer about to land on your head. So you get washed to the beach, and it's impossible to get back out. So it's just such a unique spot that even with paddling, you need to have jet ski assistance. So yeah, look, I think the 20-foot run, I think you could get to 20 to 25 feet Hawaiian. When I say that, I mean I'm talking 40, 50-foot faces. I believe 60-foot faces could be doable if you have the perfect, that swell where it's not too big of an interval. Like something like a 12 at 17. That's 20, 25 feet at Nazaré. And like these, like dead winds, or even like a light little onshore. Because paddling those waves out there when it's offshore is super hard.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you're going to rank your favorite big wave spots around the world, where does Nazaré fit into that conversation? What's number one, and maybe it is Nazaré, but what are your kind of your top three or your top five favorite spots?
Yeah, it's a good question, and depending on what you're doing, right? Like if I'm turning up with my 10-0 to paddle, it's just so hard to. It's funny because I ask these questions to the guys on the late drop, and I try and think of it myself. I'm like, what is the best big wave in the world? And I would have to say consistently for paddling, it's got to be Jaws, Piahi, right? But then I think about perfect cloud break. Like
Yeah.
perfect cloud break to me is potentially better, but it's so inconsistent. Happens so rarely we don't get to see it. But like those two days of Volcom contest and the year before, like I mean, those barrels are as big and actually longer on that reef. So
Yeah.
where does cloud? I think cloud break's one of the most underrated big waves in the world because we don't see it as much. And then obviously for me, Mavericks. Mavericks is right there. And look, Nazaré gets a lot of flack. It's not a perfect wave. It's so challenging, but that's what we do as big wave surfers. We challenge ourselves, and to be able to go out and position yourself at Nazaré without this, once you get out there, jump off the ski, no ski help, navigate yourself around the lineup, put yourself in harm's way, in under it, and to successfully catch a big wave out there and kick out. That's a really hard thing to do, So, for me on those special days out there, like Nazaré is a great paddle wave, and a lot of people will disagree with that, and that's fine. But for me, the exhilaration of being out there, and it's not perfect by any means, and there are three peaks, and those peaks even shift a little bit from north to south. It's not perfect, but to go out and put on a performance at Nazaré, it's pretty rewarding. So Nazaré is, and these are the waves that I've surfed too, right? There's a bunch of big waves that I haven't surfed, but for me, on its day, Nazaré is up there for me in the top three.
Cool. Well, if anyone's just joining us now, we are live from Nazaré and running through several of our Surfline cams throughout Europe. We've got the front end of a very long period, very large, extra large XXL swell actually building into Europe now. This is courtesy of former Hurricane Epsilon that transitioned into an extratropical storm and then merged with a colder low moving off of Greenland. And that merging was explosive, and you can see this beautiful looking storm here on satellite imagery from yesterday. Saw massive seas within this storm. That silver that you see there, you don't see that too often on the Surfline wave height charts. That's indicative of seas 50 feet or greater. Modeled from a modeled perspective, we're looking for a huge area of 50 to 55 foot seas. Would not have been surprised at all if we'd seen any satellite passes showing 60-foot seas. The maximum seas that we did see that were satellite verified were around 56, 57 feet, and actually we're kind of on the outskirts of the storm. So certainly one of the more impressive storms we've seen over the last year. We should see actually one of the biggest October swells on record for Nazaré this evening and going into Thursday morning. We're about an hour before sunrise local time in Nazaré. We've been watching this swell come up. It should be coming up pretty quickly this after the remainder of this evening tonight. Should peak tonight and then just slowly back down for the day on Thursday. But we are expecting very, very large surf on Thursday morning along with excellent conditions. Basically as good as it gets in terms of wind, swell direction, swell period, and really are expecting a special swell basically from now through tomorrow. And it's not just Nazaré either. We're looking at waves across Europe and generally pretty good conditions too for just about all those spots, whether it's kind of fickle Irish slabs. We did have a question come in on one of those those waves up in Ireland that are fairly notorious, and we are expecting to see really some pretty good waves coming up through there. We're looking at Mendaka here. Tides are still a little bit high for Mendaka this afternoon, this evening. Tomorrow's probably going to be the time for Mendaka, but it looks like there's going to be a really great window in the morning tomorrow, probably later morning too, as with that lower incoming tide. Looks like favorable winds, and then moving south of Nazaré, got super tubes here as well, and probably be pretty big and unruly. It's not the perfect direction for supers, but should be some nice windows there. And then even moving down towards North Africa, down and towards Morocco, spots like Anchor Point. Really should be getting good as we move through the next 24 to 48 hours. And all of these cams are available on Surfline. You can check them all out. So whether that's logging in late tonight to catch that morning session if you're in the United States somewhere, or whenever you get the chance, this is a pretty special swell and not one we see very often. So it's been fun to chat through it. I'm joined by Kurt Corte, who's a fellow lead forecaster, and Jamie Mitchell, a big wave charger and paddle extraordinaire. Kurt, I think I've been dominating the questions to Jamie. Do you have anything that you wanted to chat about?
Man, I was just sitting back listening to it all. That was pretty awesome. I did want to mention, I was kind of keeping an eye on some of the buoy observations. There's a buoy that's actually right off of Nazaré, the coastal buoy there. That it's in around 300 feet of water, but it's measuring actually has kind of jumped up here. Even as we've been talking, the most recent observation from 4 p.m. local time today is up to 4.8 meters for significant wave height, and the peak period has jumped up to over 20 seconds. So we're definitely starting to see that swell really filling in here, and we should get another observation here in the next few minutes, but definitely coming up pretty quickly as expected.
Excellent. Well,
hey,
good to
Kevin,
see that.
I've got some swell questions for you, some forecast questions. Can I ask you some?
All right. Shoot. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm just interested in, obviously, I was lucky enough to be in Europe for Hercules. So I know me and you went back and forth, but I guess, for anyone that's listening in, like, as a comparison to that storm in 2007, how's this storm comparing to what Hercules did?
Well, it's somewhat close to, it's in the ballpark. It is not as strong, it's not as large, but it is pretty close. I think Hercules is probably the most impressive storm I've ever seen in 20 years of surf forecasting. The only other ones that really come close, like the Code Red Tahiti one, was super impressive. But that Hercules storm was just incredible. It was, one of the things we look at when we're watching these storms, these fetches develop for different areas, is we'll look at not only the strength of the storm, but also the potentially the strength of the high that's kind of supporting that storm. And the greater the pressure gradient between those two features, between the high and the low, the stronger the wind. And we've noticed over the years too that the stronger that high, the more consistent the wind tends to be within that storm. So more consistent wind equals more consistent swell. I want to say Hercules, it was like, I believe the pressure gradient was 110 millibars, and I can't remember if that was like a 930 storm, or 930 low and like 1040 high, or something like that. So it was one of those things where I would just eye popping from that perspective. This particular storm was still very impressive. We had the difference between the high and the low was between 80 and 90 millibars. We saw massive area of 40 to 50 knot winds and peak wind speeds up around 70 to 80 knots. So well past hurricane force winds. So not as impressive as Hercules, but pretty close. Some of the differences we were talking about in terms of certain spots will probably actually be bigger on this swell than Hercules. Nazaré's got a chance to be close because the Hercules swell was more west for Nazaré, and you see the largest surf, you see the kind of the canyon work. It's most of its magic when that swell direction is a little bit more northwest in angle. And so size should be actually be pretty close. You know, a couple of the other spots like Mundaka, for example, also like Swell, has a little bit more north in it. You know, it's tucked back, you know, way back in that corner down in the Basque Country between, you know, off of Spain, but kind of right where Spain and France meet. And so when you have swells that are a little bit more west, you get more shadowing. So even though the Hercules deep water swell and storm was probably was more impressive than this one, the surf on this particular swell for some of those spots, you know, whether it's Mundaka or whether it's some of those big wave spots in the Basque Country, could actually be very similar, maybe even a little bit bigger. Some of those Irish slabs, kind of same deal. With liking a little bit more, for kind of that example, more west northwest in that type of swell. So it's all these different spots are going to be, you know, they're some are probably going to be a little bit bigger, some are going to be smaller, and it's all that combination of swell direction and swell period and things like that. From a purely storm perspective, I would say Hercules was the more impressive storm. Again, it's I think probably the most impressive storm I've seen in 20 plus years of surf forecasting. But this one is not too far off either. This is one of the most impressive storms I can remember in recent memory.
Yeah, that's cool. And
Actually,
then
you
another
have a-
similarity, which is
Sorry, I actually pulled up some of the historical stuff for Hercules, and our database had it almost 32 feet at 22 seconds at 298 degrees off of Nazaré during the peak of that swell. So a little bit bigger significant wave height, period, maybe slightly longer, and then the direction, as you mentioned, Kevin, maybe a little more westerly than what we're going to see with this one. And I think, if I recall correctly, an interesting thing about Hercules also was I think it was the third in a series of just really powerful North Atlantic storms. And that kind of throws in that other variable that we look at as, you know, an established, already developed sea state where you have a powerful storm like this that can already work with a little bit to help transfer that energy down into the ocean. And as we mentioned earlier today, we saw a pretty good warm-up day at Nazaré from a pretty strong storm a couple days ago. So the North Atlantic was already kind of rumbling around before Epsilon even made its way up into the North Atlantic and really sparked this whole thing off.
Yeah, you know, Sean used to call
this
that.
is a really. Sorry, Kevin. You
go ahead, James.
Oh, okay. I was going to say it's a really great example of. I feel like, you know, how hard your guys' jobs is and just the specific angles and swell direction, because, you know, I'm sort of surprised at what I'm seeing on the screen right now at Nazaré with sort of how small it is. I thought it would be a lot bigger by now. And then, you know, if you look at 2 days ago at Nazaré, and I've seen some waves of Sebastian, and, you know, and sometimes the waves necessarily, the ones that miss breaking out the back with the energy, like there can be a size where it's bigger, but not big enough to be further out. So what I'm trying to say is, like, it's not quite big enough to be a big mama, but it's bigger than hitting the inside. And so it's this in-between size. Now, even though it's bigger, it's not going to photograph or even look as big, because at Nazaré, some of these ones that come in energy that, like a smaller swell that comes in, will actually, the energy will keep itself until the inside, and then it jacks on the inside, and it's this clean runway. And, you know, I saw a couple of really beautiful waves of guys going left and backdooring it from like a day or 2 days ago that might look bigger than what we see this afternoon, you know. And I think that's just when you're looking at numbers and forecasts and stuff, there's still these added variables in there at certain spots, and the way they hit certain parts of the reef or the sand that makes a huge difference. And I think that's just interesting to understand if you're not really, like, you know, like really into the forecasting, that sometimes everything goes out the window and it's just what you're seeing on the fly. You know, you're reading what you're seeing, and you know, and also, again, you know, like for me, when I was thinking about this swell, everyone thinks, oh, no wind, that's going to be awesome. But as you can see now, there's a layer of haze and a layer of, like, looks like marine layer of fog. And that could be, like, tomorrow morning could be fogged out, could be socked in with fog. Like when there's light winds for a few days at Nazaré, it tends to be like sometimes it can get socked in with fog and actually needs a little bit of wind to blow that marine layer away. I'm not sure if it's forecasted to be fog, but that's another thing you got to think of too.
Yeah, it's just to speak specifically on the fog. That was something I was a little worried about earlier this week. Just seeing that light wind too, and kind of the weak high pressure. As as of looking over stuff yesterday, I haven't looked at that particular variable this morning. We did look okay. Most of the models are showing pretty much unlimited visibility. So I think that high will be enough, and the wind will be just strong enough that we won't see that fog in the morning. Fingers crossed. We do have some cloud cover and a mixture of maybe just some sea spray or something in the air, so it's a little dark. Getting back to your other point too, for me, I think for Kurt, for us as a forecast team, that's where it's been really invaluable working with someone like you or any of the other surfers that we've worked with over the years, where we don't necessarily, as a forecast team, we don't get the opportunity to go to all these spots very often that are away from kind of our home regions, home breaks. Like, we've been fortunate enough to travel a little bit. Kurt has been to Portugal at least one time, if not a couple times, for the event at Super Tubos, and I've been to some of the Pacific spots and been very fortunate to spend a lot of time in Hawaii too. But so to get that feedback from you, Jamie, on just all these little things that are going on, there's a million different things going on, and not there, no two swells are exactly the same. We can compare and contrast storms and swells and really have a pretty good idea of how things are going to look. But there's all these little variables too that go into it. So the more intel we can get, the better. It's Kurt. Before you jumped on, Kurt and I were talking about how we put the forecast together and getting these upstream observations, whether that from satellites or buoys or whatever. And it's like, I was kind of thinking about it like this is like it's a mystery, to be solved, and sometimes we get more clues on certain swells than we do with others. Sometimes we're complete flying blind, and it makes things really difficult. And you obviously do the best you can with Mother Nature, but the more information, generally speaking, the more information you can get, the better. And to get that local intel feedback from surfers that are going, it's been so helpful for us over the years, and it was something that was started by Sean. He had a great relationship with a number of different guys, and would really get down, kind of fine tune the details, and whether that's looking at the mechanics of a certain place, but just getting feedback on like, hey, I think this is what's going on, but you've surfed this spot a million different times. Can you give me the heads up on it? But it's I feel like you learn something new with every swell, and all the feedback that we can get, we always really appreciate getting it. It's fun it's just fun to look at these things.
And I mean, we worked a lot together with trying to forecast the events, and we know how hard the Atlantic is to forecast, especially with the wind. It looks amazing. I mean, I've done a trip. I mean, I remember a couple of years ago, the forecast looked incredible for like 10 days. Jumped on a plane, spent $5,000 to go trip, and I didn't surf. I didn't surf. The wind went back to front. It was onshore. It was giant, and you're just like, what? How did that happen? And I think I still think, even though you get skunked, I think that's the beauty. I think that's the beauty of being a traveling, not just a big wave surfer, but a traveling surfer, is that, and putting your time in at certain spots. That's when you see guys that, like, why is that guy going there? The forecast doesn't look that great, and all of a sudden it turns on, and this guy scores, or girl scores the waves of his life, right? Because he sees something from going to a spot and being in tune with it that other people don't. And look, a 10 at 16 swell at Nazaré tomorrow looks different than a 10 at 16 swell in 2 weeks' time. For whatever reason, it just is. Like you said, no two swells are the same. Whether it's 5 degrees of angle, 5 degrees more west than 5 degrees more north, and it just is missing. Like the big toe event we had, that you guys put online the other year. It was meant to be giant as well, but there was just a little too much west in it, and it just, size for size, was disappointing. But if that had been 7 degrees more north, it could have been 30% bigger. So these little numbers and little angles and little changes mightn't seem like very much, but it makes a massive, massive, massive difference. And I think that that's where Surfline is so awesome for us, is because we can fine tune those details. And look, nothing's perfect. Mother Nature's not perfect. Computers aren't perfect. You got to go off your gut, you know. And I don't know how many times I've called you, Kevin, and said, "What do you think?" And I'm like, disclaimer: I'm not going to come back to haunt you if it's a bad, you know what I mean? At the end of the day, it's just, you know, you got to make a decision off, you know, all the information that you gather, and then you take a last look at it yourself, and then you take a chance, and that chance sometimes works out and sometimes it doesn't. But I think that's the beauty of chasing big swells. You know, that not, if everything was perfect and beautiful and rosy, then every spot would be crowded every single time too, right? Everyone would not just know to be there. You know, the beauty of people not going because they think it's not going to be good, and you seeing something that they don't see, and the mystery of taking a chance and scoring is a beautiful thing, you know. And it's addicting.
Yeah, it's kind of like, that's like the art of forecasting, I think. Yeah, you've got you might have 3 different models telling you 3 different things, but if you've seen, you know, there's like the pattern recognition and you've seen it, you can read between the lines a little bit. You can score, and yeah, I totally agree. Yeah, there's I don't, as much as I always want to be right on a forecast, you know, I think that would almost get boring after a while too. Not, I don't, maybe not boring is not the right word, but there's, you know, the challenge involved with calling some of these things, and, you know, especially if we're talking about some of the events. You know, I don't know if the general population or general, you know, surf watching population understands the logistics that go into a big wave event in particular. You know, you have to call it on basically 3 days before the swell's actually there. So a lot of times that means that the wind's not even on water just yet. And especially if we're looking at something for Nazaré, and wind forecasts are all over the place. So it's, you know, you look at all the data and you hope that you've had a consistent look at what the different models are showing, what the different charts are showing, and you call it on, you hold your breath a little bit, and hopefully everything comes together. And like you said, sometimes it absolutely does, and we score, and other times it's something goes haywire from that 72 hours before the event is called on until the event goes on, and it's you know, whether the wind gets screwy or whatever. But Nazaré in particular, man, it's trying to nail down a wind forecast more than a couple days out, generally speaking, is incredibly difficult, and especially as we move a little deeper into the season too. When you have, you know, just front after front coming through, and trying to time, you know, when the wind's going to trend back to southeast or east southeast for 6 to 12 hours or something like that. And again, it's fun, and I love the challenge, and I know Kurt does too, as he's done a visual forecast for a number of different events, but it's stressful as well.
Yeah, I think another thing looking at Nazaré that I'd like to touch on, just for the surfers and people watching, is that, you know, about 5 minutes ago, you saw a set sort of rear up at the back, and you saw all these little ants, you know, the jet skis and all their tracks are like heading out to sea, and you know, you see, look, if you look to the screen here, you can see like skis down to your right off peak 2. You got, you know, guys sort of and girls sitting probably on peak 1 as well. Got this poor guy inside here in the white water that's been there for 10 minutes. He just looks like he's can't get out. And then you've got, you know, people out in Big Mama, right? So then you've got, so this is a great angle. This angle here like gives you a way better perspective of what it looks like. But you know, you got to think of each, right? Because you could have someone coming down at 70, 80 foot face going 50 miles an hour, and if people have been sitting on the inside, or people on peak 2 and they're jockeying for position and think that someone on the outside is going to miss it, and they, you know, you're dealing with a massive jet ski track at going like 50 miles an hour down a 70 foot face wave, and that's a real issue when when you're towing at certain spots, and especially if it's going to be as clean as we think it's going to be, that's going to be even more defined down the face. It's like going down snowboard powder and hitting a big track or something. It's so that's going to be something that's really challenging tomorrow, because I'm guessing there's going to be a ton of jet skis out there, a ton of rescues are going to be made, and people that are going to be on the wave of their life are potentially going to have to hop over jet ski tracks or dodge jet ski tracks. So that's another real challenge that they'll face tomorrow.
Just a big, scary place to me, man. I don't like everything that's going on beyond the waves, beyond the jet skis. Like, it's just the cliffs, everything that's happening at this place. I remember talking to Shane Dorian a couple times, several years ago, but he was just like, he was looking to score a paddle swell here, and he did. We helped him get a couple different ones, John Warren and I, and he was just like, man, that place is it's just spooky. Everything that's going on, and I know you mentioned this just a little earlier today, but then when you're talking to Ross in the your late drop podcast, and just people kind of see it as this somewhat of a burgery wave at times, but you just get rolled by one of those, and I imagine that the energy would be somewhat similar to like a Cortez. Maybe is that a decent assessment? Maybe Cortez isn't necessarily like super square all the time, but like it's just this crazy open ocean energy, and it just rolls. And I don't know if there's any place that's really comparable to that, but do you think it's somewhat similar between those two spots?
Yeah, what's crazy is it has a open ocean feel to it, because if you fall, you see a lot of guys will fall going super fast, right, and they'll like sort of look like they get the speedballs on a skateboard. And like, for example, that Benjamin Sanchez one on that giant swell years back, where he fell like right at the top and he sort of skipped down the face. So now he's a fair way out the back, and the chances of picking him up are pretty slim, and that's where it feels like a really open ocean style. You don't really hit the bottom, it feels deep, and you feel like you're getting dragged a long way underwater, and then you come up, and then it sort of feels like Porto. Then it sort of feels like it's recycling you back to the lineup, back out, and it's not. You sort of get to a point where you're not going in and you're not going out, but you're sort of stuck in limbo. And like I said, you might pop up and you're like, oh wow, here's the wave coming in front of me, and not even see the one blindside you from the side. So you got to be looking left and right, not only straight ahead. And it's a long hold down, and it's violent. I mean, if you talk to some people that have surfed all around the world and they've had a bad wipe out in a bad place at Nazaré, it's pretty horrific stories. It's this place has some crazy energy. I was there in October years ago. My daughter Nazaré had been born, and me and Cassie went and we hung out with Garrett, and we're there for a month in October. Beautiful, best time of year to go. And I was surfing the shore break on a finless board, like just on days that it wasn't breaking, and it was like 1 to 2 feet, and I was getting slammed. The power, the energy, just in that place, it was spooky. I can't. It was so crazy. I'm like, I felt like I was getting pounded at 8 foot sunset, and it was like a 1 to 2 foot shore break. It was crazy. So the place has a crazy amount of energy, and it's like Porto. Porto has that same canyon style effect where it comes in, funnels in, focuses, and there's something about where, imagine these 25 second intervals just squeezing through these channels, and then they come up and then they unload. There's just something about the focus being so of the swell and the energy being so compact that just it's crazy. It's unexplainable, but and you're saying, if you look, there's so much white water, right? So you the white water's drawn out all the way to the beach, and so when you come up, you're trying to suck air, and you're sucking foam, and there's 6 feet of foam on top of the wave, and you're trying to get your head to get a breath before the next one hits you. So Nazaré has its challenges, and it's yeah, man. Like everyone's had a worse wipeout somewhere else. People say Mavericks, some people say Jaws, and trust me, I've had bad ones everywhere, unfortunately. But but Nazaré is like I think Shane said it good. It's spooky, powerful, and just there's something about it that there's some just crazy energy.
Yeah. Okay. So we actually have a couple questions coming in through our YouTube chat, and I think this one would be a good one for you, Jamie. So from Tiber Long, how long would a swim from the impact zone to the beach be if you lost your ski?
Good question. Obviously, depends on where you lose it, but look, it can. I think if you go back to when Alex Vitello last year, they lost their ski
Yeah.
by the time he got to the beach. I mean, I know he was unconscious, right? But he nearly probably got to the beach faster because he was just getting like washed, right? So, and that was minutes, So if you're not a good swimmer, it could take you 10 minutes to get to the shore. You'd be
Yeah.
exhausted. I mean, it's. I remember the year that I won the contest and we lost the ski going out for the final, and we got and we had to like get rolled back to the shore, then go back out. And I was exhausted before I even got out, and that was with having jet ski assist. So yeah, it's a challenging swim, and the problem is you can't really swim. It's sort of like you've just got to let the wave pound you and roll you in because you nearly want to conserve that energy just to be going under
Yeah.
the waves and coming up. So, and you're in so much white water and foam, So, if you're to lose your ski way out the back, then you're in for a long day, a long swim, But if you lost it halfway in, it might take you a few minutes. But it depends on the size of the swell and, like we said, the direction. If you get sucked in with a north swell and start sucking you towards the rocks, that's going to happen real fast.
Yeah. What's in like just on say kind of your typical northwest swell? If you're kind of in that in that impact zone or inside where the waves are breaking, like what's the distance from there to the beach?
Yeah, good question. On a paddle, say like a focused paddle swell, like a 20-foot paddle swell. It's interesting, right? Because you can have say you take a wipeout and you come up, you can be close to the beach after popping up the first time. So it's just really,
Yeah.
it's so different. Sometimes I'll pop straight back up and I'm like right on the impact zone of another one breaking. And sometimes if you don't get to pull your vest, so that's a big thing too, right? How fast do you get to pull the inflation vest? Now, if you pull that inflation vest early, then you're going to pop up. Like Ross said, he didn't pull his inflation vest, and that's why he got sucked towards the rock because he stayed underwater for a long time and he moved a long distance. But you could be 200 yards. Like if you fall on a 20-footer out the back, it could be 200 to 300 yards. But towing in, you're a lot further out than that. So it varies, and the further you go down from the peaks, too, I feel like you're a little closer. If you're at peak 3, you're down the beach and you're a little bit closer in. It's sort of if you look at the topography there and the angle of the cliff, it sort of tapers in as well. So it just varies because there's so many different swell directions and even waves that look different even on a perfect northwest swell. You may get looks at a west looking wave or a northwest wave or a north looking wave, and depending on what they do to you can make a difference as well.
Yeah. So we had there's another question here from Donovan who said, "Can you guys explain the distinction between a burger and a more conventional wave?" Usually, when we're talking about a burger, it means it's a wave that's kind of soft and crumbly. Obviously, Nazaré is anything but that, but it can kind of look like that, I suppose, on some of those really big days, Jamie, as you mentioned, like that Big Mama peak where it kind of breaks at the top, and sometimes it'll fully break, sometimes it'll back off. We might say something like a wave like Sano Free or something like that is just kind of soft and burgery. More conventional wave, especially when we're talking like a big wave like Jaws. You think about a really big wave at Jaws, and there's a barrel to it. It's breaking top to bottom, and you can just kind of the power, I suppose, of the wave is more evident than a wave that kind of somewhat crumbles over. Again, that's not to say that, and as Jamie has mentioned several times, to say that Nazaré is a burgery wave at all. It's got a tremendous amount of power, but sometimes it's just not necessarily breaking like top to bottom with those really big barrels that you see at a wave like Jaws or Mavericks or something like that. And I don't know, Jamie, if you've got anything else to add to that, feel free.
Yeah, I think that the great thing that we're seeing now is more photographers and filmers, like surfers, they're looking at different ways to get better angles to make the wave look, more top to bottom. And I think, with the drones these days, and there's people on the back of the skis, I think, you've seen some of these great angles of, Justine DuPont and Garrett and even Kai last year and Lucas, like where you're seeing the wave from side on. From the channel, and that really gives you a perspective that this wave, when you get the right one, is not a mush burger. And it's an interesting saying, and unless you've been there, like I said, we get it, it's not a Jaws. but what is? It's like what is a Mavericks, what is a Cloudbreak? They're special waves, but Nazaré has so much slope to the slope. Say the slope's 100 feet, just for a number's sake, right? Say from top to like the slope of the bottom of the wave is 100 feet. Then like a big giant wave, when this one breaks top to bottom, like it's as big as a 60-foot wave at Jaws. But then what you're seeing is this thing break and then roll down the face. So you sort of in your mind, because it's so big, it actually makes it look smaller. I don't know if that makes sense, but because it's breaking so big and then it rolls down, you're like, oh wow, it's just broken and rolled down the face. But until you get a perspective of that initial top to bottom where it breaks, like that there itself is a giant wave, and then it breaks and rolls an extra 30 feet down the bottom. And I think that's where we get confused with judging wave heights, and that's a whole nother story. But I think that's where it's like, okay, like, is that bottom part of the wave even, judgeable or measurable, But I think the beauty of Nazaré now with all the different angles is we're starting to see her from the side angle. It gives you a perspective of what that thing looks like top to bottom. And I think, if we can get some angles like that from this next swell, it's going to be incredible.
Yeah, that reminds me of the footage that Kai got last year on one of those swells, where he posted it. Kai Lanning, he posted it to his Instagram account, and he basically does like a kick stall into this giant left barrel, and the clip on Instagram is he's got kind of like heavy metal music playing, but it's one of the most incredible images slash videos I've ever seen of Nazaré. I don't know what that was, like a 60-foot wave or how big it was, but it was like the biggest barrel.
Is that the one he cartwheeled down from looked like a drone shot looking down? Is that one, or is it the one where he actually got the barrel and the GoPro was sort of 360 GoPro from behind?
Yeah, it was like the GoPro. I think he was maybe wearing a helmet cam or something like that, but it was like
the helmet one.
It was point of view. Yeah, like the biggest barrel I feel like I've ever seen, and it the footage is so incredible because that type of point of view, that GoPro type of thing puts the 99.999% of us who are never going to ride a wave like that somewhat in that situation. And that was probably one of the coolest things, coolest images, coolest videos I've ever seen in surfing, to tell you the truth. That was a spectacular wave, and it does give you the appreciation of, how powerful, how big, how hollow Nazaré can be on the right swells too.
Yeah, and I think what happens also too, I think that we see this, you see some of the waves you take off on, and some of them don't break, right? So you're surfing this giant, big, just open face ocean swell, and also the waves tend to be pretty fast at Nazaré. They're not like a long point break style wave like Jaws is top to bottom, and you're going up the top, you know, get a big couple of turns in, then set up the inside barrel and get spat out. It's, you know, you're looking at a different animal. But you know, for reference, and this is a good reference, like when me and Twiggy and Shane were all at the Belhera for the Hercules Swell, you know, we sort of challenged ourselves enough, like paddling, and it was sort of the wind had come up, and the winds weren't as good for that swell. It was like nearly a south wind. It was like a up the face devil wind a little bit, and I was still paddling, and our friend Peo Israel, and I'm sure he'll be surfing actually, you know, Belhera this swell, but they were towing, and he's like, hey, you guys want to tow? And I'm like, I'm okay for now. And Twiggy, we were both sort of like, it's okay. And he's like, no, come on, just give it a go. Trust me, you'll have some fun. And so Twiggy went, and he got a couple of waves blown by me, just like holding on for dear life, going so fast. And he kicked out, goes, hey, Jamie, you've got to jump on. He goes, it's the fastest I've ever gone on a surfboard. He goes, it's radical. He goes, you've just got to try it. So I jumped on, went and got a couple, and I was like, oh my God, like so fast, so like just technical. Every little bump that you're on you were so focused, and even though you weren't necessarily really surfing the wave that you would expect, you kicked out and you're like, oh my God, it was super adrenalized. And I feel like that sort of transitions into Nazaré. You are going probably as fast as you ever will go on a surfboard, and there's something about knowing that if you fall or hit a chop or not focused for that 100% time that you're on the wave, that the consequences are so real, you know. So there's something about that adrenaline dump that you get by going so fast and then kicking out that makes it fun. People, you know, it makes it fun. They love it, and they get that the buzz, you know, and that what keeps bringing them back. So yeah, look, it's not a Jaws like we've said, but there's something else about that wave that gives you that same feeling as maybe, you know, another wave around the world that's more perfect. So I think if you're looking at why do people go back? People are like, why do you go back to Nazaré? Why are these guys towing Nazaré? Like, it looks shitty. I'm like, well, until you've been out there and you've been on a wave going that fast and that's that high of a risk, then you can't really have a comment. You don't really have a say, to be honest, because you have no idea what it feels like. And yeah, to go as fast as you've ever gone on a surfboard on a giant wave like that, it's fun.
So when you jumped on the ski at Belhara a couple years ago on the Hercules Swell, was that before or after that crazy like paddle wave that you got?
Yeah, it was after. It was sort of after. The wind had come up. Our window was in the morning, and me and Twee actually had a disaster that morning. Our jet ski sank in the harbour that night from the surge. There was so much surge coming in the. So this is what I find fascinating about this swell is that like the Hercules Swell peaked overnight, and I think that through the night, Belhera would have. I mean, from what I saw the next day, Belhera would have been 100-foot wave swells out there, 100%, and we'd actually taken a tow. We'd planned on towing, right? Because we thought it was going to be that big, but we had the ski ready. The volume of water coming through the peak of the swell at the night actually just there was surges rolling through the harbour. So we turned up in the morning, our jet skis upside down, sun, and we're like, oh, that's great. What are we going to do now? So we're in the water in the dark, swimming the ski, trying to get it up on the beach, and we end up just getting on a boat and going out, and we didn't have a ski to tow. And there was people towing, but Shane was out there, Sancho was out there, a couple of locals, I think Justine was out there, and we jumped off, paddled out. We were a little bit late for the party, but yeah, that was in the morning, and then the wind came up, and it was just too funky. It was hard enough as it was, and then we sort of took a break, jumped back out, tried to paddle again, and that's when we jumped on. Was like in the afternoon. We jumped on and got some waves on the ski in the afternoon. So
That's obviously another open ocean wave, with I would imagine somewhat similar properties to like a Cortez or a Nazaré. And for those who haven't seen it, just Google right now Jamie Mitchell Belhara, Belharra, and you'll see one of the craziest waves you're ever going to see. I remember seeing footage of that, and it reminded me of that. Kurt's laughing at me right now because I'm going to reference the perfect storm again. But it reminded me of that wave in the perfect storm that sinks the ship finally at the end of the movie. Spoiler alert! Sorry, they don't make it. But yeah, that was just I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Like that was one of the biggest waves I think that's ever been paddled into. Is my guess.
Yeah, tempted. Yeah, that's that. To be honest with you, Kevin, I told myself if it was in my window of being able to, that I would try and go and get redemption there, because, being more experienced now, better equipment, I think I'm a better surfer than I was back then. I think that given that chance again, I'd make that wave. But if, say, no, this is we're just talking, not real, but if COVID wasn't on, I probably would have skipped Nazaré and went to Belhara and tried to make that right, So I actually even tried to, while I was looking at Nazaré, I was looking at going to France, see if there was a way to get in there, but France is on total lockdown, so there's no way of getting in. So, but yeah, I would love to. I'd love to see that wave again, with the little winds that's going to be there this time, and like you said, I think you said that the swell is focusing pretty good down in Belhara for this swell as well. So, yeah. What I find fascinating about both these swells is that they're gonna peak overnight. This one, yeah, and the Hercules one.
Yeah, it's unfortunate in some respects, although we still expect really large surf tomorrow. Hopefully we'll wake up to mostly sunny skies here at Nazaré and just see the magic as the sun's setting here. And we're gonna Jamie, I wanted to shift gears a little bit too and just talk about your podcast, The Late Drop, which is you can actually watch on Surfline. You can check episodes on Surfline or wherever you get your podcasts. I understand your guest for the next episode for next week will be Nathan Fletcher. Have you already chatted with Nathan and we're waiting to drop the episode, or is that going to happen sometime in the next couple of days?
No, yeah, it's already done, and yeah, it's a banger. It's really cool. Nathan is such a interesting character, super intelligent. I really enjoy hanging out with him. His kids are around the same age as my kids. We see him at the skate park and all the same places, and we always have amazing conversations. And yeah, he tells some incredible stories about obviously growing up, being a Fletcher. His childhood. And some incredible stories. One in particular about Chile and a near-death experience that, again, it's one of those stories that you had heard about, but you hadn't heard the full story. And he goes into depth about it's about not making it home, so pretty intense. But yeah, it's one of my favorite podcasts. The last few, season 2 presented by Future Fins we had Ross Clark, which was an epic one. Last week we had Tony Moniz, which I thought was really awesome to hear from old school, an OG of the big wave community, Tony Moniz. And be sure to listen to Nathan Fletcher, because it's one of my favorites. And yeah, you can get it on iTunes, Spotify if you just want to do the audio version. Stitcher, iHeartRadio, everywhere you get your podcast.
Cool. Yeah, I've been stoked to listen to a number of those ones, and I can't remember if the one with Jughead was that a test, or is that one actually available too?
No, my friend, Justin Holland. Yeah, so Yeah, he broke his. We were out surfing Karamup Bay, Cowbommy, and he snapped his femur, and that's a whole nother story. But no, that was actually my first test run at doing the podcast. So we have that on file. I may even like to go back and rehash a whole podcast with him because he's one of my best friends growing up. From a young age, and we disconnected for a while, as you do. Leaving high school, reconnected. Started chasing some swells together. Went to one of the biggest swells to hit Australia at the time, and he snapped his femur 3 kilometers offshore, 10 kilometers from the boat ramp, and I had to save him and put him on the sled and tow him back. And oh yeah, man, I don't recommend doing that to yourself. It was a horrible situation, but he survived, and he's a funny dude. It was a funny podcast, so hopefully we get to post that up soon too.
Yeah, I got to listen to that as part of the test, and was just, obviously it's not, you don't want to laugh at somebody who's broken their femur, out in the middle of the ocean, but the way he tells that story and everything that goes on and going to the hospital, I was dying the whole time. I was like, oh yeah, I won't ruin it in hopes that we can get that one out, but those podcasts have been amazing. I really look forward to the one with Nathan Fletcher coming up next week. And again, you can see the audio video version on Surfline, or go anywhere that you would normally get your podcast and check out the late drop. And we've been stoked to work with you on that, Jamie. Well, I think we are gonna wrap up here. Keep an eye on the cams tomorrow. This swell is building in as we head towards sundown here in just a little while. You can see that beautiful orange glow on the horizon here on our Nazaré cam. We've got an XXL swell that's building in now. It's going to peak overnight, but Thursday should be pretty epic with really big surf, light wind, and not just at Nazaré. We've basically just about any spot that can hold the swells be pretty much going off over the next day or two. So keep an eye on those Surfline cams for all the action in the next couple of days. Jamie, thank you very much for joining us. Kurt, thanks for jumping in and rapping with me on everything going on too. And we may be back tomorrow. I'm not sure if we're going to go live or not, but if not, keep an eye on the Surfline cams. You can watch all the magic go down on this big swell.
Thanks, Kevin. And if I may just say one last thing. Stay safe, everyone. If anyone's listening this before tomorrow, please make smart decisions. Be in your comfort zone, push yourself, but please this is a swell that is not to be reckoned with, and any silly mistakes could be very consequential. So I pray for everyone. Hope everyone has an amazing day. Everyone gets home safe, and we can't wait to watch the show. Good luck, be safe, and can't wait.
Cool. Well, all right. Thanks, guys. Thanks all, and we'll enjoy hopefully the safe show tomorrow.